Hi, everyone. Um, so, uh, yeah, as Tony said, the title of tonight's class is "We Are the Firebringers," and I think that will uh, why the class isn't. It's not really a class. This is not really a class tonight. But why this discussion is titled that will become apparent as we proceed. Um, the And as I said, this is not going to be some hour-long lecture. I'm going to present a few things, and we're going to be graced with a guest speaker who you will meet soon. Um, but the idea is to um, sort of elicit um, the broadest possible discussion on some of these issues. So I will just begin by saying that um, I would encourage everyone to participate in the discussion. And if something strikes you during the course of the next half hour or so, to write it down, jot something down, get in the queue, and speak your mind, because I believe this is a very important topic, and it certainly calls for a lot of discussion to thrash some of these things out. Now, I'll begin by saying that I think, as everyone knows, Promethean Action and LaRouche Pack, that we are very much focused as one of our primary foci right now on the question of Donald Trump's Agenda 47, the programmatic and policy initiatives that have been made personally by Donald Trump, in largely in the realm of economic policy, of rebuilding our nation um, economically, as a productive economy. And if you go around to a lot of the, I don't know if you want to call them pro-Trump websites. I won't name them, but people know what some of these are. A lot of the various sites on the internet, which you could call populist or right wing or conservative, they're all up in arms about Biden and Kamala Harris and, what this person is doing and that person is doing, and issues like transgender rights and things like that, the border, immigration. Some of these are very legitimate concerns, more than legitimate, important concerns. But what is really striking is that you can visit these sites every day, and you will find almost no in-depth discussion um, of economic policy, uh, uh, which is, in my mind, startling and a fatal mistake politically. But even more than the political implications, the reality uh, is that our nation, our republic, has been systematically and deliberately, it did not just happen. People say, well, this happened, the factories moved overseas, or, other things like that. None of this just happened. It was deliberate policy to destroy the United States as a productive economy. Um, and we see the effects of that today in tens and tens and tens of thousands of cities, towns, villages, and communities all across America. And we see it in the cultural impact it has had among our younger generation, leading to widespread pessimism about the future. Now, um, before I proceed, um, I would suspect that a significant number of people probably not everyone, but that a significant number of people who are on this call tonight might have also participated in the discussion 2 weeks ago about Benjamin Franklin's economics. And if you recall that discussion, I would ask you as we go through this material tonight to reflect back on what was discussed then in terms of what real economics is. I went through Franklin's stove, but I went through a number of things that and I'll return to this a little bit later in the discussion tonight. But to keep that in the back of your mind, because people get very confused and very sidetracked on this question of economics, particularly when it comes to banking and finance and things like that. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to say something which some people might object to, because a lot of people really, really are fighting day in and day out to maintain an optimistic attitude about the future of the nation and about the political fight that we're in. And, what I want to talk about is pessimism. And some people don't like to talk about that. They consider it too negative. They want to point to the good things that are going on. And there are a lot of good things going on. We just had this launch, what was it, yesterday or day before yesterday? Thursday of the latest, what's the name of that rocket, Tony?
Starship.
The latest Starship launch, which is just it's just a magnificent scientific accomplishment. And there are other things like that, which are the products of human imagination, creativity, and human courage to bring these things online. But it's my view, and some might disagree, that you can't just point to things like this. You have to recognize the environment within which we live and the culture that has been created in this country. Because the fact of the matter is, and again, some people might disagree, but this is my view, that we now find ourselves in a situation where the nation is just engulfed in pessimism. This is particularly rampant among the younger generation. And people like to point to the, optimism of youth, but if you look at the millennial generation or the generation a little bit older than them, I lose track of what these age groups are called. But people, in their late teens, 20s, early 30s, there is a widespread pessimism about the future, about their own personal future, about the future of the country. And this also, affects a lot of older people, many older people, because, I don't know if people read the email that was sent out on this discussion tonight, but how many people, ask yourself this, we now have a financial oligarchy, whatever you want to call it. We call it at Promethean Action the British Empire. Other people who can't quite figure out what that means might refer to it as the oligarchy, the global elite, et cetera, et cetera. The central bankers, whatever you want to call it. Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum. The British Empire is the most accurate and precise definition of it. But whatever you want to call it, we now have a financial elite which controls all of the major institutions in this country. from the banking institutions, the related financial institutions, the government institutions, the intelligence services, the news media. It's an oligarchy. It's an elite. And their power today is unprecedented in the history of the United States. Their hold on power, the range of their power. Now, how many people do you know today? And ask yourself this seriously. How many people do you know today who truly believe that we can break that power, that we can dislodge these people from the control they have over our nation and our lives? Take the richest, most powerful financial oligarchs in the country, the billionaire class, and all of their control. How many of you really believe that we can eradicate this, that we can remove them entirely from the positions of power they now hold? We can win victories, as the email said, victories over, we could build the wall, we could get transgenderism out of the schools, we could do other things, we can win victories, we can, we can do other things, we can roll back some of the worst evil, but, how many people truly believe that we can actually take this country back and make it a functioning constitutional government run by we the people, as opposed to the oligarchical interests? Now, if you ask yourself that seriously, I would say, and again, you might disagree, that a lot of people really don't think we can do that. But that's the subject of We Are the Firebringers. That our intention is to do just that. And a lot of it, whether people realize it or not, comes down to economic policy. So with that introduction, I would like to introduce our guest speaker. This is from a speech that he gave in December 3rd, 2009. And so that's now 15 years ago almost. And, coincidentally or not, the title of that speech was We Are the Firebringers. And I'm not going to play you the entire speech, but we're going to play about a 15-minute excerpt from that speech. Okay, Tony?
Now, what I've done is to propose some time ago that we get certain people in Russia, China, and India, and the United States as a block of nations around which combined are sufficiently powerful as a combination to force the needed changes on a planetary level. In other words, by net changes, I don't mean jobs. The idea of giving somebody a job to rake leaves is not exactly an economic development program. What we need is production jobs. We need nuclear power. We need a national rail system. We need a space program, a real space program, revived. Because we don't have factories of any significance anymore. We shut them down, especially under George W. Bush Jr. and this thing there. They've shut it down. What happened to the automobile industry? What's happened to the aircraft industry? Go to all the high-tech industries we had. What happened to them? They're gone. We still have the knowledge of that technology, but we are losing the people who are able to practice it. We have jobs, yes. What are jobs worth? Raking leaves? You build a world by raking leaves or doing social work? No, you build industries. Today, that means, for example, nuclear power. Technologically, it's impossible to develop the population of this planet without nuclear power on an extensive basis. And that's not enough. What you have to count on is higher energy flux density. You have to increase the energy flux density of the power in the hands of labor. If you can't do that, you cannot achieve the productivity necessary to save this nation and save the world. We talk about a vast program of this. We have to go to space. We have to undertake the industrialization of the moon. Because if we don't do the industrialization of the moon, we can't get to Mars. And if we can't get to Mars, which may take several generations to do that with human beings, we can get there already with the slow craft, 300 days or something like that. But if you're going to bring human beings there, you've got to talk about a mere few days between moon orbit and Mars orbit. And that involves some problems. But we pretty much shut down NASA, which was the mission orientation for that sort of thing. Now, the Mars project is necessary for humanity in the sense that humanity functions on the basis of something about human beings which animals don't have. The animal world has creativity and the development of species, new species, varieties, and so forth. Even the non-living world undergoes development. The universe, the physical universe, is undergoing development all the time. But it has no will to develop. It has no knowledgeable will to choose to develop. It develops because the creativity is built into the universe. Man is different. Man has the willful creativity to shape the universe. And therefore, man cannot function without having the inspiration to use that ability, that creative power, to achieve higher goals than are currently practiced. For example, we have a planet of very poor people. In Asia in particular, in Africa, a terrible mass of poor people. We're running short of many resources. We have to create new resources. We have to increase the productive powers of labor of the existing population. We have 6.7 billion people now on this planet. We're headed towards 7. We have to progress to meet that challenge. We have to inspire our people in each in their own culture to take this mission orientation for mankind as their responsibility. In order to challenge people, what do? Well, you educate them. And you adopt missions which make goals, higher goals, clear to those people. And children say, I want to do this. We had back in the 1960s, even into the beginning of the 70s, you had children who were saying, I want to go into space. The moon landing program of NASA was an inspiration. The Russian-Soviet program was also an inspiration to the planet. You have to have these kinds of goals, of missions for mankind to use his creative powers to raise humanity to a higher level of existence. You have to talk to your children and grandchildren about this kind of goal. And it's only when you get their imagination stirred that they become creative. And without the bestirring that creativity, mankind does not progress. And that's what we used to say about the United States. We were a nation that was committed to that sort of thing. What we did under Franklin Roosevelt was an example of a nation which had been crushed under a legacy of Teddy Roosevelt and Wilson and similar types of scoundrels. We were almost destroyed. But we rebuilt, and facing the challenge of the war in Europe and the challenge of unemployment, the challenges here, we mobilized our people to create a machine which is the most powerful machine the world had ever seen. The machinery of the United States, which was deployed for World War II. The intention was to continue the development of that machine in the post-war period, not for war purposes, but for construction of the planet. Roosevelt had a clear plan for this thing. Truman had a different idea. Truman kissed the butt of Winston Churchill. And we've been getting the backlash from that ever since. We destroyed most of our capability. We destroyed our industries. We just shut them down. We had all kinds of projects, for post-war projects, which would have led to great achievements. And we shut them down. Nuclear power was one example of this thing. It was feasible, principally. Sometimes it takes you a couple of generations. Once an idea is clear and feasible, it may take you 2 or 3 generations to actually bring it online as effective. But the way in which to organize mankind, two questions. First, we have to understand culture. We have to understand national cultures in particular. Because national cultures embody, within the use of language and other things, embody the herited bits of knowledge and experience of past generations of that people. Therefore, you cannot go into a country and say you can't create a Tower of Babel, a one-world economy. You have to use the culture of the various cultures of the people as your mobilizing force. Because it's in their imagination, which is associated, the powers of imagination associated with their culture, in which they are able to mobilize creativity. So you want to create the opportunity for upgrading them through fostering the benefits of their own creativity and inform them of the objectives that other people are achieving, which they may copy and build upon. So you need a system of sovereign nation states, of sovereign peoples, different cultures, each with its own sovereign expression, and the unity of these people for a common purpose, the purpose of humanity. To do that, you must stir the imagination, the powers of the imagination of the people. And what means reach to space. We're going to Mars. It will probably take us 3 to 4 generations to do that, to solve the scientific problems that are involved in overcoming very high speeds of, or rates of acceleration in interplanetary travel, which is required for moving mankind around. And this is not easy, but we know we can solve the problem. We just have to go through the steps of solving it. Take us 2 or 3 generations or more, but we'll get there. But as long as we inspire our young people, especially younger people, to look at their adulthood, we've got people in their 20s, they're going to be functioning probably for 50 years to come if we can get Obama out of office. He doesn't seem to be in favor of that sort of thing. And they should be looking forward to what they're going to produce within their own lifetime as benefits for humanity of which they will be proud. It's a span of about 60 years, approximately, that they think in terms. Most people think that way. They live that long. And when people can find a purpose in their life, in the sense that what they are doing now, what they are preparing themselves to accomplish, will lead within their own lifetime to the foundations of something much better than they have today. That's when you can capture and sustain the imagination of a people in its own culture. And when people are united, even they have different cultures, if they're united by a common purpose to do this, to cooperate to do this, then we have peace among nations on this planet. And that should be our goal. It should be our goal now. What seems impossible to small-minded people are the ideas that are necessary to get out of the pit that we're in today. So we're in a very interesting crisis right now. And it started, in a sense, the present crisis in its present form started back in 2007, when I proposed the Homeowners and Bank Protection Act. Now, this act was not adopted because of people like Barney Frank, and he was up front on this sort of thing. And Barney's a funny guy. We never been able to determine exactly what language he speaks, but we know he's there, and we're not too pleased by it. Anyway, so they led the charge on opposing the installation of my Homeowners and Bank Protection Act, 2007. And there were many people in leading positions, including governors of states in the United States, who were prepared to move to push that act forward. And it could have been implemented in the autumn, by the autumn of 2007. What Barney Frank and his cohorts did was exactly the opposite. They wrecked that. And what became the process of bailout in its early phases, bailing out corrupt banks, bailing out the swindlers of Wall Street, and similar kinds of things, became the objective. They did nothing to stop the loss of homes of American citizens. They did nothing to save jobs, industrial jobs. They did nothing to maintain education. They did nothing to maintain and improve health care. But they went in exactly the opposite direction. And they became slaves of the British Empire, the little tiny queen of the British Empire. And so we built up, we have trillions of dollars, tens of trillions of dollars right on the books in the United States of worthless debt, which is imposed upon us on bailout of things which we should let go bankrupt. We don't need Wall Street. This economy doesn't need it. We need a constitutional banking system of the type which Alexander Hamilton prescribed and which is embedded in our Constitution. So why don't we just stick to our Constitution? We are supposed to be not a monetary system. We're not a monetary system. We're a credit system. The government of the United States has a monopoly, constitutionally, on the creation of credit and of public credit. No other institution should be allowed and should go to jail if they try to inflate things by coining their own money, such as by a central bank. That's a swindle. These people belong in jail, and they should have their ill-gotten gains taken away from them. Now, but in this case, these people were able to bail out bankrupt institutions which were hopelessly corrupt and wreck the United States. What do we do about this? The solution is simple. You have to have the guts to do it. If you don't have the guts to do it, you're not going to have a United States. You're not going to have a Europe. You got the guts to do it? Are you worth your salt? Are you going to do it? Put this thing through bankruptcy organization. You take what we have as a precedent with the Farmer Glass-Steagall Act, which was actually nothing but an implementation of a provision of the U.S. federal Constitution. We are a credit system, not a monetary system. Monetary systems are illegal with respect to our Constitution. They were practicing an illegal practice, an unconstitutional practice. Sorry, buddy, we found an honest judge, and you're about to lose all this ill-gotten gains you had. We don't need Goldman Sachs. We don't need these kinds of things that Roosevelt tried to free us from. We don't need them. What we need is a good, sound system of commercial banking system as what we used to understand as the commercial banking standard. But we need to create a credit system under the U.S. federal government and our Constitution, because we're going to have to cancel this $23 trillion of waste paper as debt, just wipe it off the books. And the federal government then has to have a single act rammed through the Congress, which creates a supply of credit for several purposes. One, we don't create jobs. When these guys talk about jobs today, they're talking about handouts, picking up paper, getting your fingers in your nostrils and cleaning out your nostrils, or something like that. It's worthless. We mean productive jobs in certain categories. We don't have an auto industry. We're losing the aircraft industry. We're losing the power industry. We're losing everything that's worthwhile. We're taking people who have skills but are aging, we're throwing them out in the streets. We're threatening them to kill them by health care policies which are intentionally met as mass murderers as Adolf Hitler's, which we have on the books right now being voted up or down. We don't need this. What we need is real work.
Okay, can I be heard, Tony?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't know what to say to follow that. I mean, there's a lot in what Lyndon LaRouche just presented to you, which I think bears quite a bit of discussion as we move forward. Look, I just want to make 2 points. It's sort of in closing. the first is in just reflecting back again on the discussion from 2 weeks ago with Benjamin Franklin. Because if you remember any part of that discussion, um, what Franklin is posing is that an economy, a real economy, or what in the United States you could call, or should call, a constitutional economy, is based on the human imagination, as Lyndon LaRouche just discussed it, creativity, new inventions, new technologies, new industries, advanced manufacturing, increasing the productivity of the overall population and the individual citizen, and that in order to carry that out, you devise a credit system in order to put such a productive economic system into place. But the credit system you create is not primary. The credit system you create is created solely for the purpose of advancing and building a productive economy. And it has no other purpose. And this gets you to the question of what you just heard from Lyndon LaRouche on the difference between a monetary system and a credit system. Now, again, we could take this all up in the discussion, but what I want to just close with is a few comments on the question of national banking. Because this continually comes up with people, I don't know, somehow claiming not to be able to understand it or something. I'm somewhat baffled by the difficulty people have, although I am aware that in our culture today, everyone just thinks about economics in terms of money. But even so, this is not really, in terms of what LaRouche just presented to you, in terms of what Ben Franklin was doing, this is not that difficult of a subject matter to really, comprehend, to really understand the principles involved here. And what I want to refer to is the argument that was put forward. They're separate arguments, but they're really not. It's really one argument. It's just two features of the same argument that Alexander Hamilton put forward in the 1790s when he was presenting his program for for his financial program for the new American Republic during the first term of George Washington. And I want to refer to two things. One is that in his 1791, I believe it was 1791, report on national banking, in which Hamilton lays out his plan to create a national bank, and he details how such a bank would function. He bases all of this on the general welfare clauses in our Constitution. In particular, it's based on the preamble of the Constitution, which says that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare and the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution. That, in the preamble, if you look at the Constitution is essentially a set of procedures, a set of, how the government is going to work. But it is in the preamble that what is laid out is the intention what is the philosophical intention and framework of this government? And it is centered on the role of the government, of we the people, of our elected representatives, to one of the charges to promote the general welfare of the people. And then in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution, there is a clause which, says a number of things, but it, among other things, it says that where he's talking about tax policy, tariffs, duties, imposts, and other economic measures. And he says that the government will have the power to take these initiatives, these economic initiatives, in order to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. This is what's in the Constitution. And this is what's often referred to as the implied powers of the federal government. But if you look at those two things as a whole, that's not really the implied powers. Excuse me, I made a mistake there. But, it's that our government has a primary responsibility on behalf of the general welfare of the people. And then somewhat later, this is a little bit, this is, the highly abridged version of this, but somewhat later in the report on manufacturers, Hamilton's report on manufacturers, in that report, Hamilton argues forcefully for the manufacturing development of the nation, and argues forcefully for the government of our nation to play an active role, a leading active role in promoting science, technology, manufacturing, in promoting the productive development of the nation. And in that, he points to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And this is where where the implied powers come in. And I'll read to you Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. The Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or any department or officer thereof. So the government, the Congress, shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, right? Necessary and proper to carry into execution the foregoing powers. And all of the foregoing powers flow from the mandate that that our government must obey constitutionally to promote and defend the general welfare of all of the people of the United States. And this is the argument Hamilton makes, in his report on manufacturers, for a primary active role. He calls for, subsidizing scientists, subsidizing inventors, because all of this will lead to new inventions, new advances, new technologies, which will have a revolutionary impact on the well-being of the people, on the future of the nation, on the productivity of the workforce. It will lead to increased prosperity, increased economic power, new discoveries about how the universe operates. Now, I mean, I would argue that this is exactly, precisely Benjamin Franklin's notion of economics. And Hamilton lays this all out. Now, I don't really want to get into I mean, it can come up in the discussion. I don't really want to get into a long discussion of people want to say, well, is the national bank, wouldn't this be like a government control over our finances? I mean, if people want to bring that up, okay. But look, I mean, just, clear your mind a little bit before you know, raise such a question. Clear your mind a little bit. We live in a financial dictatorship right now. You're worried about a national bank because it will give the government too much power? I mean, are you kidding me? The Federal Reserve right now is a dictatorship over the finances of this country. And the policies of the Federal Reserve and of the major New York banks and the London banks have done exactly what Lyndon LaRouche described in his video presentation you just watched. They have destroyed the productive economy of this country. And the fact of the matter is they've destroyed our banking system. Now, I'll give you one little statistic, which hopefully might shock some people. But in 1966, we had 24,000 banks in this country, private banks. Now, I don't mean branches of banks. I mean, there's God knows how many branches of banks there are, how many ATMs there are. I'm talking about actual banking institutions, separate private banks. We had 24,000 of them in 1966. Today, we have 4,900. We've gone from 24,000 banks to 4,900 banks. We have lost over 80% of the banks in the United States, over 80% of them during this era of deregulated finance, right? And overwhelmingly, most of the banks that no longer exist, the banks that have been shut down, overwhelmingly, they're what you could call, community banks, smaller banks, mid-sized banks. I mean, some are a little bit larger, but largely these were mid-sized or regional banks or community banks. And what was their role? Their role was, the way they generally functioned, is they served the communities or the regions in which they operated. They provided loans to farmers, small businessmen, manufacturers, other, entrepreneurs, or things of this type. They provided credit for the local community, for productive activity, right? And they're all gone now. Most of them, they're all gone. Who's stepped in to, fulfill that role? Nobody has stepped in to fulfill that role. Most of these people today, these entrepreneurs or scientists who have a bright idea, and some of them do have bright ideas, they have to go scrounging around looking for private investors, and they're lucky if they find them. Because there is the commercial banking system we once had no longer exists. Now, one of the primary roles, really, I believe primary roles of establishing a national bank and shutting down the Federal Reserve is the national bank will begin the process of rebuilding our commercial banking system, which means also vastly increasing the number of private commercial banks, and establishing a national credit system through which we begin to rebuild our productive economy. Because what we have today, which has been destroying us and which is leading us to ruin and which has destroyed the future of the younger generations in this country, is nothing but a absolutely parasitical financial system. Parasites, thieves. I mean, you heard LaRouche mention Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs, Blackstone, the hedge funds, all of these things, you know, all of this stuff should be outlawed, completely and totally shut down. It is nothing but financial gambling. It's unconstitutional. Look, it's parasitical because under the Constitution, as LaRouche said, only our government, only our sovereign government, through our elected officials, through the US Congress, only our sovereign government is authorized to print money and to determine how that money is put into circulation, to establish a national credit system. And instead, through the Federal Reserve System, they print not just hundreds of billions, but trillions of dollars of what passes as our, currency, Federal Reserve notes, but it passes as our national currency. They print trillions of dollars of this, which then the financial speculators, the oligarchs, use to enrich themselves through hedge funds, through this, through that, through laundering money. It's a Ponzi scheme of maximizing financial profits. So instead of having a credit system which is ensuring that there is a flow of credit intended to build up the productive economy to benefit the American people, we have a monetary financial oligarchy which runs a scheme to enrich themselves. And in the course of doing that, shuts down the steel plants, the auto plants, the chemical plants, the rubber plants, our farms, our factories, shuts that all down because there's no profit in it. And this is where we find ourselves. We are literally an economic ruin today. And we have to begin the process of rebuilding that. That takes you back to Trump's Agenda 47. But what I would argue is that this question of national banking, of shutting down the speculative practices and returning to a credit system to finance a productive economic renaissance in this country, that this must become a leading element of the Agenda 47 fight. Because you want to rebuild the auto industry, you want to bring back some of these industries, you want to do this kind of thing. Well, you think Wall Street's going to let you do that? You think the City of London is going to let you do that? We have to break the power of these people and reestablish a sovereign national banking system. Now, in closing, I just want to do something which I think is just sort of a little fun, but I want to do it anyway because you heard what one of LaRouche's comments there towards the end of his speech, where he's talking about what needs to be done. And he asked the question, do you have the guts to do it? Do you have the salt for what it's going to take to do it? And that's a question I think each and every one of us needs to ask ourselves every morning when we get out of bed. So I'd like you to put up that final little graphic there, Tony.
Sure.
Now, all of you should recognize this. This is the Declaration of Independence, right? Now, I have a question. Now, obviously, I can't hear any of the answers, but I'm going to pause a little bit. My question is, when you look at this document, the document right in front of you there on the screen, what do you think the most important thing in that document is? Now think about it for a minute. Don't just jump to a conclusion. I mean, there are some obvious things. First of all, we're declaring independence from the British Empire. Then there are the philosophical principles which are enunciated in the beginning of the right of every human being to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So all of that is good. All of that is good. But what do you think the most important thing is in looking at that document, looking at the document on the screen? What do you think the most important thing is? And I'm going to wait 10 seconds to let you think about it.
A number of people have raised their hands, but
Well, that's okay. That's all right. I don't want to, if people disagree with me or if people agree with me, they can say so. Because I before we get to what people think, I'm going to tell you what I think. I just wanted people to have a moment to think about it. In my view, the most important thing in that document, looking at it on the screen, are the signatures at the bottom. The signatures at the bottom, right? There are 56 of them. 56 Americans signed this document. Now, you have to reflect on the fact that in signing this document, you were committing personal treason against the king, against the British sovereign. You were committing an overt and public act of treason against the king. And as such, you would be subject to the death penalty if you were caught or captured. And as I think people know, at the end of the document, the signers state, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor." Our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. And that's exactly what they did. And, the reason why I don't want to make a big point about this, but the reason why I wanted to do this is because, Lyndon LaRouche gives a speech and he says, do you have the guts to do this? Do you have the salt to do it? We're talking about taking the most powerful financial institutions in the United States and really in the world, the central banking system, the Federal Reserve, the power of Wall Street, and eradicating it, eliminating it from the world. That's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about an economic reform. We are really talking about a revolution as to, who is going to control the future destiny of this country. And when LaRouche says, do you have the guts to do it? I mean, I think you have to, rather than just sort of passing that over, you have to reflect upon that in terms of the courage it took for these 56 human beings to sign the Declaration of Independence. They had the salt for what it takes. And the question we have to ask ourselves, do we have the salt for what really needs to be done, if we're going to carry out the full implications of Trump's Agenda 47 and everything related to that and everything that LaRouche just talked about in the video that you just saw. So, as I said, this was more in the form of a harangue than a class, but we did have Lyndon LaRouche's video. So why don't we stop there and open it up for discussion, okay?